Fred and I are going to talk about how to create 2,000 revenue and cost management questions in 7 days. And I'm sure there are some people here for whom revenue and cost management questions aren't really your thing, but you can interpret this title as how to create a fairly large number of questions on a fairly specific topic in a relatively short amount of time, with the key point being that also with very little effort on your own part. Okay, now I'm going to skip straight through to answering the how-to question. That's very obvious. That is, have your students create the questions, and I'll be using a tool called Pairwise, and I'll talk a little bit about Pairwise. But I think the why question is also really interesting here. Why would you want your students to create a large bank of questions on the subject they are learning? So there are a number of theoretical benefits, and I'll just touch on those very briefly. But the main thing is that students love answering questions for practice. And so by doing this, by having this large bank of questions available, it can be used as a practice resource. Now, I'm actually going to ask you guys a question. I promise it's not too difficult, but it's also not trivial. And if you'd like to attempt this question, I'd invite you to point your browser at pwlive.pw. Now, you can do this on your phone, you can do it on a computer or a laptop. If you don't have a device with you, that's also not a problem, because I will show the question and then you can think about what you think the correct answer is. Okay, so I'll give you a bit of time to do that. pwlive.pw. What you want to see is enter code to join appearing on your screen. Okay, we'll get to that in a moment. What I want to touch on now are a few different ways that students get to interact with these questions that they've developed as a cohort. The typical way, the most standard way that students interact with these questions, is they answer the questions they've never seen before. So what this means is they log into Pairwise, they click on a section called the unanswered questions section, and this is a section of the interface that organizes all of the questions that the student hasn't seen yet, and then they just go through and answer those questions. In these two screenshots, the questions are ordered in different ways. So on the left, the questions are ordered by the date that they were created, and the screenshot on the right, they're ordered by difficulty. So in this case, the more difficult questions are appearing first. And if you look at some of the questions the students have created, now this is a Comp Sci 105. It's kind of an introduction to data structures and algorithms course. And if you look at some of the questions, the bottom one there says, Kanye and Kim went through a complicated situation. You begin to roll your eyes thinking, oh no, this is just what I expected. But actually, if you look at that question in more detail, it's a perfectly good question. What the student has done is they've provided this interesting backstory about the challenges that Kanye and Kim had naming their child, given that their surname was West. And now they've got another chance to do a better job with their second child. That's the backstory, but actually they provide this code listing. And a very important skill for students in this course is, how can you trace through this code? In particular, understanding fundamental data structures like lists. A second way that students can access the questions is through review quizzes. So this is where they actually attempt to answer questions they've already answered before. And they can return and re-answer questions as many times as they like. In this case, a student is kind of halfway through a 5-question quiz. They've got the first question correct. They made a couple of mistakes. But the idea here is that when they begin a quiz, they can choose to answer questions on a particular kind of theme. So for example, they might choose the private collection quiz, which is a random selection of questions that the student has previously indicated they found were very good or excellent. Basically, questions a student has previously found useful, so they can go through and answer those questions again. And then the third way that students can interact with questions is live in a class, so like the situation we have here. So if you had a chance to go to pwlive.pw, you should see in front of you this enter code to join. Just before I go on, does anyone need more time to get that appearing on their device? Okay, great. So as an example, we might be in a class and I might want to see what the students are thinking. We all know that students are a bit hesitant when it comes to raising their hands. So in this case, we can attempt this question. So if you go ahead and just type PAATJ, case doesn't matter, into that code field, what you should see is this response saying, great, you've joined. And if you see that, you can just wait for everyone else to join. And the question will begin when I, as the instructor, am ready for my students to attempt the question. Does anyone else need more time to get the great, you've joined message? Okay. So given that, we can actually see how many people we've got here. So we've got 24, which is pretty good. If you go ahead and click that start button, you can now see the question. It's a logic question, and the challenge for you is to work out which of the safes contains the treasure. For those of you that don't have a device, here is the question. Okay, so submit your answer if you haven't. Also indicate how confident you are, how sure are you that your answer is correct. And the reason I think that is important, who was it? Was it Laszlo earlier today talking about confidence, the importance of building confidence in your students? I agree, and I think confidence is great, but confidence can be dangerous if you have a misunderstanding, right? If you are sure that your answer is correct, but it's not, that's actually worse than being uninformed, right? Not knowing what the answer is. So let's go ahead and have a look. So in fact, we can see that there's a pretty good spread of responses here. Now you can go ahead and click results on your device, and you can also see this chart. The correct answer was A, so congratulations for those of you that got the correct answer. Now, for those of you that didn't, nobody knows you got that answer incorrect, right? Unless you were showing the person sitting next to you. That was a private bit of feedback to you. You didn't have to put yourself out there and raise your hand. Now, of course, you can do this by show of hands in class. You can even do the confidence vote without really even asking for it, because if you see students doing this, it means that they're kind of not really sure, right? But here what we can see is some really interesting stuff. So on the right, these are the incorrect responses. And in fact, we had a couple of people, 20% of the people that got the answer incorrect, actually thinking they were correct. They were certain they were correct. Now, if that's you, you might want to, this is just a fun question. You can imagine more useful questions. If we had more time, we can go through why the correct answer is actually A. But let's move on. Do students like this approach? And I'd like to particularly thank both Roger and Angela for trying this out in their very large Med-Sci course. Was it Med-Sci? It was the big OGG lecture theatre plus the overflow lecture theatre, so it was a large number of students. And Angela was kind enough to ask them on the forum afterwards, do you prefer submitting answers anonymously via a tool, or do you prefer show of hands, given that show of hands is actually quicker and simpler? So the question even implied to students that even though it's quicker and simpler to raise your hand, what do you prefer? 97% of students who were in the class said they preferred anonymously voting. And a big part of that, I think, is not having to raise their hand and have people see. So we've seen how to answer the questions. There are a number of different ways that students answer the questions. In terms of creating the questions, that's really what the Peerwise tool does. It provides a very simple interface where students can publish these multiple choice questions. There is a large bank of questions, 2.5 million odd questions there, spread across about 9,000 different courses. And each question has an associated explanation, but also there's this large amount of data associated with all of the questions, things like answers, comments, difficulty, and quality ratings. Here are a couple of examples. This is a question developed by a student in one of Peter's courses, a MATLAB programming course. So the students create three things. They create the question itself, they create a set of options, and then they create an explanation. And writing that explanation is a really key part of the process. It's where the student explains in their own words why the answer they believe is correct is actually the correct answer. And there's all sorts of feedback. Students can see how their answers compare to other students' answers when they're playing around with these questions. Lots and lots of good examples of questions being created. On the one hand, a lot of students really like this, so you get some feedback like, I'm slowly getting addicted, I'm addicted to earning badges, this can't be good, it's a Sunday night, my new obsession, we're using it, I love it. And responses to surveys, things like being able to get into the mindset of the exam writer, you have to know the subject very well, right? To ask a really good question, you've got to have a good command of the underlying subject. But there are also students who don't like this approach. Peerwise is the devil. Peerwise is the worst thing to ever exist, and this is given all of the horrible things that have actually ever existed, this is a particularly stinging bit of feedback. And I love this comment at the top. I don't pay thousands of dollars to learn from other students. I pay to learn from someone who is supposedly qualified to teach the required materials, and adequately so. So before you get too concerned about students absolutely hating this approach, in general, the kind of responses you get on surveys that ask students, did you find this an effective way to learn? The vast majority of students do agree or strongly agree that they did find it useful. It's a fairly small minority that really dislike it. Interesting to note from this survey here that in fact authoring questions was seen by students as more valuable to their learning than answering questions, yet both were seen to be valuable. There are a number of very robust effects from the cognitive psychology literature indicating why having students generate questions, writing explanations, and testing themselves are all very valuable. I don't have time to go into any of those in detail, but certainly if you're interested, happy to talk to you about it. How do you get started? Because we all don't have a lot of time. And if it's, well, how much time is it going to take me to set this activity up where my students can publish all of these questions? How long does that take? I like this tweet from Ross Galloway from University of Edinburgh. Just set up POIs for the semester, time myself 58 seconds from starting to done. Now, of course, one of the reasons is that once you're set up, it's a student-driven activity. So you can be very hands-off, watch the students work together to create this bank of questions. So this is the full process to setting up a bank. You log in, you provide a name for the course. I've called mine NGen 131 Semester 2, and then you upload the list of students who you would like to have access to that course. And that's the entire process. And at that point, you can sit back and just observe and see what the students are doing. Now with that, I want to hand over to Fred, who's going to talk about his experiences with his students using POIs in revenue and cost management.
All right, thank you. Now I know some of my colleagues have used it. I think Chris, you were the one who got Julie, who was course coordinator at the time, to start using it. I thought I'd just share a few examples from my experiences, what I like to get out of it, and perhaps provide an example of somebody who's taking a more extremely foolish level of involvement with POIs. All right. So what do we do for POIs? Three things. I could have been a poet in a past life, I guess. I like them all to start with REs. So it provides a repository of questions. It provides a revision opportunity. And it provides a source of recognition for students. The repository is the most obvious benefit. Each semester, students generate north of 2,000, 4,000 questions that they can draw on. Now for Accounting 331, this was particularly important because we've moved beyond the textbook, because the curriculum always evolves. So providing up-to-date questions that move with your curriculum was one of the big draw cards for us. Another benefit is that it is a revision opportunity. I view that many students have different avenues they like to revise on. Some people like having lots and lots of different quick answer questions that they can draw from. So we offer a bit of a carrot for them to try out this method of revision, have a go at answering questions, have a go at writing questions, see if that suits you. What we find overwhelmingly is that students tend to do more than just the minimum that we require. So that blue line there on that graph, maybe a bit hard to see, but life goes on, is what we literally need them to do in order to score full marks on our POIs assessment. But we can see that a small group of students go crazy. The top, I believe, was 400 questions answered, followed shortly by 370 questions answered. I like to post statistics on the top answerers so that they fight it out amongst themselves. And even a very sort of more normal B+y type of student will have a go at answering quite a few questions beyond what we require. So we position it alongside the other revision resources we have, such as practice exercises, past year tests, tutorials, and all that, just for another avenue they can learn from. What particularly got me into this was the recognition factor, in that I believe if a student wants to show off, they should be encouraged to do so, and I should have an opportunity to see who are the ones who are showing off. So POIs is a repository of questions I can look through, and I do read through the questions. That lets me identify the brilliant students, identify common weaknesses that students have, and because I like to post comments, there's a bit of community building involved. So here's one example. Everything in the light blue background slide is one from a student. Some students will go the extra distance and impress you. So here's an example from Sky Services, and they've applied the concept they learned in class to try to diagnose what's going on. So you get a lot of these things from students because maybe they have extra time on their hands, maybe they want to impress you, maybe they just want to have a go at some solid revision. So what I'll talk through quickly now is some of the infrastructure we set up, talk about the basic level of involvement, and then perhaps a bit more advanced involvement should you want to. So the basic principle is for every topic we teach you, ask one question, answer 5 questions. We have 2 different peer-wise assessments, basically the same thing, just at different times. The first one covers the first half of the course, and the second half of the course. We time these just to support the semester test, which happens very close to the end of the peer-wise assessment, and the exam closer to the end of the semester. We do provide quite a big carrot for this, so we provide 3% of their total grade for each of these. I think that's not overly generous because it's about 0.5% per topic, and it's more getting them into the groove of practicing writing questions so that they can learn from this. Now, we grade by percentage completion, so if you've met everything, then you get full marks. But because I get involved, I get stuck in and read every single question, that lets me identify students that have tried really, really hard, and I don't tell them up front, but those that have tried, without me telling them they'll get bonus marks, I award bonus marks for excellence for. All right, so you can do it just the pure infrastructure way. That was how it was handed to me. All you need to do is set up peer-wise, which apparently takes about a minute to do. Grade by completed percentage as well, which I think takes me about an hour to do, but that's because this is the first time I'm doing the grading process. Now for this, you get the benefit of the repository because it's created, and you get the benefit of revision because they do have to try. And as we've seen, they tend to try a bit more than literally required. If you have sort of more energy, you can have a more active involvement approach. You can blow this out as weirdly or as wildly as you like. I read all the questions, but I think if you read just the first few questions submitted for each topic, that has a lot of the spurring on effect. The trick is to get students comfortable with the idea that what they submit is going to be recognized, and that once the first few efforts get put through and are rewarded, then the community starts building in and around itself, and we start seeing a lot more. So I post ad hoc feedback. One of the benefits of being young is that you get to be buddy-buddy with your students. Maybe in 5 years' time I can't do that. I provide a weekly digest, which I'll give you an example of, and I read through also for assurance, because when you read every single question, you can very quickly pick up the cheaters amongst them. All right, so you don't have to read though, which is the part I find both sort of very surprising but very reassuring, in that students tend to moderate themselves. So here's an example. One person asks a very simple question but provides a good explanation. The students then go through and say, oh, this has been well done, good job, and they'll just provide feedback on them. And each star is somebody who agrees with the comment that it's good feedback. So this sort of community moderation then takes root, and the questions that students that get good feedback tend to strengthen over time. So this was the same student afterwards. So they've put a much longer narrative this time and an even longer explanation question. All of this primarily from community moderation. I had noticed the higher rated questions, and I'd mentioned to the student in office hours that I enjoyed your submission. And I find that this sort of informal praise, both by students and lecturers, very helpful for building the quality here. All right, so what to do? I don't try to hide the fact that I have a life outside of university. So when students try to put some cute things too in their questions, I go ahead and just respond like a fellow student. I get an admin tag though, so I stand out from a bit. Provide praise, just be liberal with it. I apply a few corrections and I joke around. And I make notes on anything that's perhaps wrongly tagged or plagiarized. The big secret is that I don't actually do much of this, in that I only actually put out about 30 tags throughout the entire course. And students just get a very immediate sense that the lecturer does care, because, well, I do. And perhaps if you don't care, you can still like idly tag 30 to say that you like it. But just showing that you're there, you're with them, start building the community in and around this. All right, I do a weekly digest as well. So the top part is easy to do, just you can drag from peer-wise a few easy statistics just to get a bit of that competition going. So for example, the top contributor was 11 questions when I posted this, and the top answer I said was 200 questions answered, second place 194 questions answered. Incidentally, second place had a higher hit rate, a higher accuracy rate than the 200, but I'm not here to judge. And top commenter, 50 comments. Some of them get very involved. Questions that I like the look of, I believe you could crowdsource this if you just ask students to highlight questions that they liked. I put a link to them and explain what I like about them. This gives the student recognition, but also encourages other students trying to develop better questions, examples of strong questions which they can emulate forwards. Then for a bit of fun, for some reason, students like to make companies about me. So at the time of writing this, I had a mobile phone company. I made the mistake of showing Pokemon once in class, so I've got 1 million Pokemon business lines now. I have a fruit merchant, and I run a hotel. The portfolio keeps changing every year, and it's good fun. All right, I'll leave you with this. Every now and again, you get a student that really wants to blow you out of the water for whatever reason, and they do something like this. So they ran an ongoing, overarching narrative about the adventures of Frid, who is the twin brother of some lecturer who teaches businessy courses at the university. These are long questions with lots of rich, distracting narrative, but also entertaining narrative, excellent explanations, and with a core question that's strong at hand. The students started this without any prompting, because they wanted to show off. Lots of students self-moderated, so they said, well done, this was entertaining to read, I'm excited to see what the next one looks like, and so on. Discovering this, I got a chance to talk to the student, encourage them, maybe have you thought about doing a bit of teaching or stay to do for postgraduate and all that. So you get lots of benefits. You get your repository of excellent questions like this. Revision, people get the strong questions to look at, and recognition for the students and recognition for other things as well. Alrighty, I think that's roughly about the 15 minutes Tessa has so kindly given me. Andrew, quick off the mark.
First up, I laughed at your 400 answers. I just had a look, 2,971 answers. That student doesn't have a life.
I know.
In my course. Do you look at the badges at all?
No, I don't personally, but that could be something to...
So I changed my marking around how many badges they get, and some of those badges are really hard to get.
So badges are achievements, so like answer the question, got a question disagreed on, and things like that.
I've got 12 students who've already got all the badges this semester.
Oh, have they? Yes. So do you actually do marks by the badges?
I give them 2% bonus if they get 20 badges.
Ah,
There's only 25, so it's quite hard.
And is this in your stage 1 course? Yes. Yeah, so I'm slightly limited because I am only a course of 350, so they have a smaller repository of questions to answer.
What did you mean by tag?
Tag, right. So we require answers and questions for specific weeks. So students can tag a question as being related to a specific week. That's all I meant by it.
Yeah, if I could just add very quickly to that, so I can untangle myself from the chair. When you set up a course on Pairwise, you can actually, if you want to, you don't have to, as the instructor, you can provide a list of course tags. So you can have things like week 1, week 2, week 3, or lecture 1, lecture 2, or loops, variables, arrays, whatever. And then when students create their questions, they're prompted to choose one of those tags. And that way, when students are then answering questions for practice, they can select questions that are on topics of interest to them. Yep.
Now, I'm not going to lie, a lot of questions are dreadfully dull. But I don't think that's a bad thing, as it were, because what other way are you going to put a revision resource out there which actually looks at sort of flashcard definitions? We're not going to develop it. You had a question?
Yeah, I was going to say, it might be a question for Paul, though. With in excess of 2 million questions, there must be a lot of overlap, and if students are encouraged to create their own, there's probably a great desire to just copy from another student's question. Is there like some algorithm that will search through question banks to look for similarities?
Good question. So that number, 2.5 million, that's how many questions there are spread across about 9,000 courses. But a given student will not have access globally to all of those questions. In fact, in a typical course, an instructor will set up a blank repository, an empty repository, and when the student logs in, they don't see anything actually. They have to begin creating questions. And I think you're kind of getting at the plagiarism problem. There's nothing stopping a student going online or going to a course book or whatever and copying some question out of there. It's a hard problem. It's not one that I really can solve here. I think there are all sorts of strategies. Maybe Fred has some good ones for encouraging students to actually try and do the work themselves, because a lot of the learning takes place when they write the question, but importantly when they write the explanation, because when you try and teach something to someone else, that's when you discover really how well you know it, I think, or not.
So there is self-moderation. So I have noted students saying, oh, this is the question directly from the lecture. Have you thought about replacing it? And because I also read it, I tend to pick these things up as well. So, if a student provides a very innocuous true-false question and 5 copied, then I'm not going to pick it up. But if I see a very familiar, brilliant question, then I'll know something's up. So that's the only way I can catch it.
I'll just add to that. So with the self-moderation, so a student can report a question to the lecturer. And so I discovered that one of my students had used my past test question, which is maybe not the best thing to copy off the lecturer. But I had another question to ask.
Sure.
So you're reading through all these. How often do you find a question where they've got it wrong? They've written a question and they've said this is the right answer and it's not.
Right. So that happens a little bit rarer than I thought it would. So maybe about less than an arbitrary number, like a fifth to a tenth. Students are pretty good at picking things up, and I think that's partly because of the popular answer versus the confirmed answer. If I pick it up either by just seeing a comment or a deviation, I'll provide a quick example or quick correction, but I don't police for accurate answers.
Is it possible to share all these exemplar courses questions to wider audience?
Sorry, what was the question again?
Is it possible for Pairwise to share all these exemplar excellent questions to wider audience? That's
what I asked Paul if it could do in the future.
That's a good idea. I think there's a couple of issues around that. Number one is that if you could just make them all publicly accessible, put them in a database somewhere that anyone could access. That permission hasn't really been granted by the question authors to do that, so that's one issue. So there's a lot I could say, but what I think the way to move forward there, the obvious way, is on the question authoring page, there's simply an option for the author to choose, yes, I'm very happy for this question to be made public, and then they could be publicly accessible. But at the moment, that's not the case.
when we used Pairwise now, of course, we told the students that lecturers will pick up some of the student submissions and include them in the formal assessments. So that acted as an incentive. If you got a good question in there, it might appear in the actual test. So
and I show off some of the ones I
we need to
like.
plan that before the course started, so students knew what they were getting themselves into.
And I went one step further and said the entire test is coming from you. And that has some really big advantages because you can see the student feedback on questions and you go, this one was written well, but half of the people got it wrong. It's an interesting question, I'll throw that in. And so you can design a test where some questions are easy, some are medium, some are hard. And the really bizarre thing is that some of the questions which I would never have asked because I thought they were so easy, we're tripping people up. And so you end up designing questions that you wouldn't have written as a lecturer, but a student has, and you go, oh, that's a really interesting question. But it takes more time than writing it yourself.
You also get questions with more tricks than you'd ever dare to put into a question for fear of public protest. But you know, if a student's written it,